So I will call the meeting to order at 6:04. It is nice to see all of you. Councilmember Gant. I want to recognize the members in the audience. We have interns from the Mayor's Internship Program. So welcome. We're glad you could be here with us today. And congratulations on being selected. That's amazing. Okay, so the first order of business is the approval of the July 2023 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I will so move.
Okay, Katie moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Greg seconds. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstaining?
I abstain.
Okay, John abstains. The motion passes. Okay. The August 2023 meeting was canceled, so we don't have any minutes from that. The next item is announcements. So I will turn it over to town staff for any announcements.
I don't have any announcements, however, I believe that Alan might have a couple.
Okay, Alan?
Sure. Well, I'll keep it brief. Good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you. I just wanted to provide an update on something that you may or may not be hearing in the coming months. As you know, Megan Pendale was the former staff liaison to the EAB and was serving kind of in an environmental sustainability role. That particular position was located within our Water Resources Department, and that position has now moved into our Budget and Performance Management Department. So they're taking a little bit of a different focus and a different lens as they move forward in that role. And so because of that transition in staffing, we are looking at, or staff is really looking at, how that role should really function as it relates to EAB. What are the functions of EAB? How should that be set up? And so that's kind of a broader conversation that's happening between council, staff, et cetera. And so as those plans are developed and as that comes to fruition or the new plan is put in place, that recommendation will come back to you all. That's something that will be discussed probably through a rules committee, which is an ad hoc committee of council, which kind of talks about ordinance changes, policy changes, and reviews, kind of set committee setups and those kinds of things. Because what we have now is we have this environmental advisory board, as you all know. We also have a committee that's like focused on trees. So we have Tree Cap. We also have a committee that's focused on our Bee City certification. So some of those functions within Tree Cap and Bee City would really align with EAB as well. And so we're just trying to figure out and make sure that we're not duplicating those services in that work. So that's going to be reviewed through this process as well. But I want you to rest assured that you are appreciated, you are valued, and that plan will come back to you all for consideration and feedback. Is there any questions?
Great.
Okay,
Thank
this was just to make sure that all of you were on the same page.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, so the next item is the rezoning review for the Beacon development. Or from Beacon Development? From Beacon Development. It's the 23 CZ 15 Apex Gateway Phase 2 amendment.
Members of the EAB, thank you all for your time tonight. My name is Gray Harrell. I'm a project manager with Beacon Partners. With me is Walker Gorham. He's our Triangle Market lead. And tonight we're gonna, we're reviewing the Apex Gateway Phase 2. I think y'all might remember this. We went through zoning back in March. We worked with council, the EAB, and the neighbors to rezone approximately 240 acres at the intersection of NC 751 and US 64. Kind of on this plan, the Jordan Lake is to the, top page of this. The purpose of this is we got the zoning approved for light industrial across the whole 240 acres. The purpose of this amendment is to amend the area on the screen here that's highlighted in red, primarily along the US 64 corridor to a planned commercial. What that'll do is allow us to target a wider range of retail uses restaurants and limit the industrial development to the south of US 64. As we were going through this, basically this planned commercial will allow us to target more like quick service restaurants as well as fast casual restaurants. So the purpose of this is to just rezone this acreage. We are maintaining all the commitments, all the restrictions that were put in place as part of the original rezoning from back in March. Next slide, please, Shelley. So just kind of to refresh that we worked extensively with staff to place a decent amount of restrictions on this. So just to highlight it, to refresh everybody's memory, starting at the top, we committed to a 100-foot average buffer along the properties to the north where the residential uses were. We also increased the ephemeral and intermittent and perennial stream buffers to an additional 30 feet, which is 30 feet above town standards. 50 and 100 is what's required, so we increased that by additional 30. We had extensive restrictions on our manufacturing and light industrial. You can kind of see it on the north. It's highlighted by that light gray area. We placed restrictions to the south as well, limiting our industrial footprints as well as some of the uses. Additionally, we committed to some substantial green stormwater infrastructure initiatives. Primarily to the north, we committed to additional 2 acres of constructed wetlands. We increased the storm detention from the town required 10-year to the 25-year detention. We committed to a minimum of 6,000 square feet of bioretention, a minimum of 5,000 square feet of permeable pavers, as well as some cisterns to harvest rainwater up to 25 or a minimum of 2,500 gallons. And again, all these restrictions are staying in place. Next slide, please, Shelley. Some other additional, I guess, financial commitments we committed to as part of the plan. We are committed to $6.5 million of public infrastructure. This is dedication of NCDOT right-of-way, as well as town of Apex roads that we will construct and turn over to Apex. One of the things we're kind of excited about is the construction of a half-mile pedestrian loop that'll run through the Phase 2 property. It'll be publicly accessible, as well as a nature pavilion kind of overlooking our constructed wetlands that I mentioned, as well as some of our stormwater features and the natural stream that bifurcates the site. As far as the tree replacement commitment, as y'all are aware, the UDO is 24-inch and greater replacement. We have committed to north of 64 replacing 18-inch caliber trees and greater that are disturbed as part of the site construction. We are currently working with Triangle Land Conservancy as well as Trees for the Triangle to honor our $200,000 commitment. We agreed to a $100,000 commitment to each organization to work with them to replace trees and to conserve land. We're trying to target that in the Apex area, but those conversations are ongoing. As far as next slide, please, Shelley. And this next slide just kind of highlights the preliminary plan for the Nature Pavilion, the half-mile pedestrian loop that I mentioned, as well as some of the infrastructure related to the pump station, as well as public roads. And then next slide, please, Shelley. And just to sum it up, again, we're solely revising that small acreage I had on the first slide from light industrial to planned commercial. All of these environmental commitments that we had made as part of the initial rezoning, we're honoring them. They're going to be in place. And if y'all have any questions, again, I'll be glad to field them or answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I see the red part that's 751 and 64. What's the other red part to the right?
The red part to the right. So are you
Order 751 on.
that is also, so the hatched area, you can barely see it. That's right away we have dedicated to NCDOT as part of the future interchange. That red area is another small acreage that we are requesting to be rezoned from the approved light industrial to the planned commercial.
And then what is going to border that red area?
So to the south that's NCDOT right away, so that'll be the future interchange.
Okay.
To the north will be the light industrial development that we have permitted by right.
Okay.
It's the location of the planned signalized intersection.
Okay.
And so it's just that the light industrial list of uses didn't have any of the commercial stuff that you desired? Is that the change, or like, what is the change that you're,
So with the planned commercial, it just allows for a wider use of like retail and restaurant use.
Okay.
So as you can appreciate with, I guess with COVID, a lot of your like fast casual, like your Chipotle's, your Paneras, they're requesting drive-throughs, and the light industrial would not allow for that current use.
Okay.
So basically with the planned commercial, it'll allow us to cast a wider net for retail restaurant tenants to kind of program that south of 64 to a more mixed use type development. It'll also limit the industrial traffic, which was a concern with the neighbors when we were going through the initial rezoning. So we feel like with this allocated planned commercial acreage, we'll put further restrictions on that industrial acreage.
I noticed in there, one of the uses was a public parking lot. Like, how likely is that in these particular areas that we're talking about?
That was requested by staff as we were working through the initial rezoning as well as this rezoning. Originally, we had it allocated to the north. There's a park and ride plan for this, and staff requested that I believe it was 10 spaces, but they requested we have a minimum commitment to a public accessible parking field for that future parking ride.
Okay, but you don't anticipate in this area that we're talking about adding like another parking lot?
No, ma'am.
realistically?
It'll be
Okay.
a small amount of uses that was requested by staff.
Okay, and so there's really not, it doesn't seem like any additional environmental impacts of this.
No, ma'am. That's
Okay.
exactly right. It's just a change of use basically from the light industrial to the planned commercial.
The lighting aspect of this project, I can't remember what conditions were put on the original as far as night lighting and stuff.
We had a dark sky commitment,
Okay.
and then there was also lighting shall have a color temperature of no more than 3,000 Kelvin. So all those initial lighting commitments with the first rezoning, we're honoring all those.
And it was with that first rezoning that you all were talking about your monument sign installation, correct? Or is that with this?
So the main focus of this is the planned commercial, but Apex has some, I guess, pretty stringent requirements for the max signage allowed. So with the size of this development, this will allow us to increase the monument signage slightly so we can have a more like pronounced entrance. And you can kind of see on this plan where the asterisks are. That's where we have those two monuments planned inside the planned commercial areas, and it'll just slightly exceed the allowable UDO requirements as they currently are with Apex.
And so since those are going to be pretty large signs, how are they going to be lit? Are they going to be like spotlight lit? Or are they like LED? Or are, I guess my question is, are the lighting conditions that are sort of being applied to mitigate any kind of light pollution going to be applied to those signs as well?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. We have preliminary elevations as part of this rezoning submittal with Apex. It's like a higher end, like Court and Steel sign, and the tenant nameplates are like backlit, so it's not
Okay.
like lights, but it's just a backlit sign.
It's not like a billboard?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay,
No, ma'am.
all right. Okay.
Go ahead. What sort of energy efficiency and renewable energy commitments do you have for this project?
So with phase one, which went through, I think, last December, that same question came up, and we have since then started construction on the Coca-Cola build-to-suit. And Coca-Cola, like we are working with Coca-Cola to implement solar panels over pretty substantial area of their parking field. So we will continue to work with staff and our build-to-suit partners to implement solar where we can for the phase two development, just like we have with phase one. So we are focused on solar. A lot of our tenants want it, so we will continue to work with them to implement it where we can.
Now, I assume switching this over to a commercial like this, you're going to put in some sort of walkable areas for the workers to be able to get to the commercial area to get to those restaurants and area instead of having to drive around and whatnot. Right?
Absolutely. We like, especially for the south of 64, we want everything to be connected, like ADA accessible, and we will work through that with staff as we advance the CDs. North of 64, because DOT has a pretty robust, it's like a flyover interchange. It'll be harder to get pedestrian activity to the south, but yes, we want it on the south plan.
Okay.
So yes, sir.
And so since these are going to be like commercial, people are gonna be coming and going more so than like a warehouse, like, type business. Could you remind me of the plans for the landscaping and native plants and things like that? Because it's gonna take a different kind of landscaping, right?
Yes, ma'am. We're working with like the trees. For instance, the 18-inch. We were committed to native trees per the Apex UDO, and as well as like just our enhanced landscaping. We're gonna implement drought tolerant plants, native plants. That'll kind of.
That was already specified?
Yes, ma'am. We committed to that as part of the original rezoning to use native plants and drought tolerant plants where possible.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't know that we have anything else to add. So, there a motion to just accept and apply?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to phrase the motion.
Yeah.
A motion to not add additional commitments from the Environmental Advisory Board.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, John seconds. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
Thank y'all
opposed?
for your time.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next rezoning case, we have the Horton Road rezoning.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Patrick Kiernan with Jones & Knosson Engineering. I'm here representing Friendly Capital LLC in the development of, well, the hopeful development of a residential subdivision, single family lots off of Horton Road. This will go through rezoning and annexation. It's currently R80W zoned, and we are asking for RR to meet the new one-to-one land use map designation. So, yeah, can I control this? Okay. Worth a try. Well, on this uses sheet, I mean, it's just going to be large lot, single family, custom home built. As part of that, this will not be a mass graded subdivision. This will be stage graded. So there are, it is a wooded site. The trees have been tree farmed in the past, so there's not really a lot of old growth trees out there. But there will still be an effort to preserve whatever trees we can. When this development gets built, it'll be, grading the roads and clearing for the road corridors, and then, the builders would come in and just clear what they need to for lots. So we have a focus on, preserving as many of the existing trees as we can. But yeah, I included this aerial as part of this just to kind of get a little bit of an idea of what the site looks like. Towards the bottom of the sheet here, you can see some existing impervious. This is actually the Jordan Point 2 pump station. So on the previous slide, Shelley, if you wouldn't mind. So there's actually two parcels. This one, can you see my cursor? Yeah. So this is not a parcel. The two parcels are, there's this one kind of rectangular slice in the southeast corner, and then the remainder is all one parcel. This parcel here has been utilized by the town of Apex for their pump station. So that impervious that you saw on that previous slide was, the pump station is back in that western corner, and then there's a site drive to get there, and the utilities kind of run in that space. I've got there's a stream buffer, 50-foot stream buffer that kind of follows the southern boundary. So I think all the existing utilities and everything was clear of that stream buffer, but that's going to be completely untouched. We're not, getting into that parcel at all. So even though it's included as part of this rezoning, it won't be. It's not owned by the town of Apex. It's being sold to the developer as part of the overall project plan, so that those utilities are just going to be on site, more or less. So I included this exhibit just to kind of help you guys get a little bit of an understanding of where development could happen. Down in the southwest corner, this is Army Corps of Engineers federal land. So we are staying as far away from that as we can. With this land use designation, we would be going for a 1-to-1, which is, it's about a 19-acre site. So we would be going for 19 large lot custom homes. So the layout essentially, more or less, it has, one east-west street and then, one cul-de-sac street. These will be kind of on average half-acre lots or so. This area in the southwest is kind of the most relevant to you guys, I would say. There is an existing pond on site. That existing pond, we are going to be asking to drain that pond, but we are hoping to reuse it as the stormwater device. So kind of reconstructing the dam, evaluating the dam and reconstructing it if need be in order to utilize that space for stormwater control. I will get into the conditions that we're going to offer, but my client did kind of have a pretty cool idea as to maybe what else to do in that area rather than just have a empty, old drain pond. I think as a general overview, that's a decent starting point. I'll go ahead and dive into the conditions that we are offering. This list here, this is basically our full zoning conditions list. So I will do my best to kind of highlight which ones came directly from the EAB suggested zoning conditions, and then there's a few others that we're kind of just volunteering ourselves as, like I said, my client's ideas or other things that we've seen some other folks offer, and we think they work pretty well. So yeah, I'll skip the first one because that's just about density. So starting with number 2, we are committed to treating the 25-year, 24-hour storm event, which is an increase from the UDO required 10-year storm. So we will commit to that. Similarly, or on top of that, we will be providing signage near SCMs and the HOA areas regarding the need to eliminate and reduce fertilizer and pet waste. We will also be adding one, we'll skip around. Let me stay in order a little bit. Developers shall install pollinator-friendly and native flora within the SCM planting areas. At least 75% of plant species used in the landscape design shall be native. We will commit to 1 pet waste station in HOA common area. Again, I mean, the site, other than that southwestern kind of chunk of land down there, is really going to be eaten up by roads and lots. So there's not going to be a lot of HOA common area other than that one chunk. So that'll be where that pet waste station gets implemented. All homes shall include solar conduit to facilitate future rooftop solar installations. We will also emphasize the availability of solar by providing the statement "solar options available" on the marketing sign, and that's something that my client has, been adamant about. He wants brochures to, highlight the availability of solar. So on here, we don't have anything committed to as far as actual solar rooftops yet, but I'll get to that in a second. One of the not necessarily recommended conditions that we are also proposing is garages to be wired with at least one 220-volt outlet inside the garage to facilitate charging of EVs. Down to number 9. So along that Army Corps property, there will be a minimum 200-foot undisturbed buffer along that property to the southwest. I can go into a little bit more discussion on that as well, because it's really closer to 400, 450 feet to the actual residential lots. But with the location of that existing pond and the stormwater pond, there will need to be a little bit of grading activity that happens in there. So an undisturbed buffer might not be possible for that full 400 feet. But as far as actual residents and keeping people far away from that land, that is going to be important. Let's see. As this will be, we're requesting to rezone this to rural residential, which is a very low density development. So in the UDO, this is actually exempt from RCA requirements. So even though that would otherwise be exempt, we are still proposing to have at least 25% of the net site acreage to be dedicated as RCA. Let me skip 11 just for the time being. Down to number 12, to reduce irrigation, HOA covenant shall not prohibit clover lawns or warm season grasses. To support wildlife pollinators, HOA covenants shall not require that fallen leaves or dormant plants be removed during the winter on areas without turf grass. And then another one that was not suggested, but that my client likes to implement in all of his neighborhoods, HOA covenants shall prohibit mosquito fogging within the neighborhood. And then number 15, that's another kind of non-EAB related condition. mostly to do about kind of towards the affordability realm. But jumping back to number 11, so down there in that, Shelley, would you mind going up to the next slide, please? So down where that existing pond would be, as this is, for 19 stage graded lots, it's a very low impact development. So from a stormwater standpoint, it's not going to be, we're not going to need a pond nearly the size that's out there right now. So again, his idea, instead of just leaving it kind of just there to be, overgrown with weeds or whatever, we've been looking into a company that installs what they call Piedmont Prairies. It's essentially pollinator gardens, urban meadows. So it's basically, all those native plant species, it's really getting in there and just layering it in thick with wildflowers and native plant species. And, it would only be mowed essentially like once a year, I think. So, carbon emissions from constant maintenance would not be a thing. So specifically the condition, the way we have it written, native pollinator gardens and or Piedmont prairies shall be planted around or within the footprint of the existing pond if it is drained, not including the area used for stormwater. And then a farm-style split rail fence shall be installed wherever these pollinator gardens abut individual residential lots. So that will be another effort. So, if you can kind of visualize it, if there are lots kind of backing up to this area, the idea would be, whatever necessary size SCM would be, towards the southern portion of that. And then the rest of that, really this whole area in here, we're hoping to do as much as we can. We're not going to disturb existing vegetation in order to do this. We'll leave the woods as they are. But any area that is disturbed from the pond draining would be replanted with, wildflowers and native plant species and everything. And then that fence would just kind of be a little bit of a aesthetic barrier to keep people from going in there and, messing with it and everything. But one of the suggested conditions was about split rail fence or signage delineating all RCA areas. But just, with some uncertainty on exactly how the site will be laid out, whether or not there might be a strip of RCA somewhere on this border here, or, how do you handle where the pond is itself? We thought that was kind of a good way to kind of meet in the middle on the fencing delineation between the development and, those kind of natural areas. So the one thing that is also not on here that kind of ties with the solar discussion that I wanted to talk about, one of the recommended suggestions from staff was, where do I have it? Cool roofs. So to reduce urban heat island effect and conserve energy, the roof homes shall be light or white colored and shall utilize a cool roof material. We really like this idea. My client was really, really interested in doing this, but he just doesn't know anything about it right now. So he's already started putting out some feelers to some of the builders that he intends on, getting bids from out here, and just seeing, is this something that, folks are offering, or, just trying to learn a little more about it before we fully commit to it. So we don't have it on this list right now. That does not mean that it won't be a condition that is offered at the time of zoning. We're just not quite ready to accept a certain percentage or whatever it is. I mean, his hope was maybe all of the homes in here could be built that way, but it could be a style thing. So originally we were discussing, implementing solar rooftops on a certain percentage, but then that kind of discussion with, well, if you have a different material, cool roof, how does that work with solar? We're just not sure right now. So again, just because there's not anything solar, actual physical solar offered right now, does not mean that that's the way it will be when this goes to council. We need a little more time to kind of learn about this process. If any of you have any information on that, we'd be happy to hear more about it. That was the first we had seen that condition pop up, but I think that was it. The only other one from staff that we do not have in here, we were able to implement just about everything else, was the no single species of vegetation shall constitute more than 20% of the plant material within the development. And that was mostly just because there are other native landscaping conditions that we're offering, you know, especially the pollinator gardens and everything, and just not knowing enough about the landscape design at this point. You know, if there was a certain, I mean, you know, I don't know how likely it is that a certain species would make up 20%, but I don't know that we're in a spot right now where it makes sense to necessarily limit what could be done, because there could be a native species that could, you know, do really well out here. And, you know, are we limiting how many we can put there just because it can't be more than 20%? The pollinator gardens, you know, if there's a certain type of wildflower or something, you know, it's a big enough area where we, you know, again, it's just not about, we don't want to handcuff ourselves too early in the process, if that makes sense. That's about all I had as far as my rundown. I hope this exhibit kind of gives a little bit of a bearing on the site. The only other thing that I didn't mention on this exhibit, Horton Road, this is something that we're anticipating from town staff. We have not received the first round of comments yet, but there is a very sharp curve in Horton Road in the northeast corner. Our development would not have any entrance along this northern portion, so it wouldn't necessarily be anything for this development, but we've talked to transportation staff, and at a minimum, you know, we're expecting there to be a dedication of right-of-way to realign that curve. Essentially, right now, it's too tight of a curve to meet the current speed limit. So whether that's a part of this development of realigning the road and creating a safer condition, or dedicating the land, you know, to the town, so that in the future, when the town project might come through there, you know, they're not having to come to, you know, these property owners of the HOA and having to request land off of them. So it's not shown here, but it's a fairly significant chunk of land that is likely to be kind of lopped off the corner right there, just to improve safety around that curve. Other than that, I think that's pretty much my rundown. So I appreciate you guys listening. Just let me know if you have any questions.
Shelley, could you go back to the list of conditions and show number 1? I didn't catch it. What was it? Could you?
Density.
Maximum density of 1 unit per acre.
Including open space and right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
Right-of-way?
This is important on this particular rezoning, is that
the UDO actually requires that for RA, RR, and LD zoning districts, that the average density only include the area within the lots. So typically speaking, every other rezoning district that we have is gross density from the entire site. So what they're basically just saying is, please apply the same rule that we apply for every other type of development to this particular project, which allows them to have their 19 units. And staff looked at this and talked about it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. And we're perfectly fine with it. It basically just means that they'll still only have 19 units, whereas otherwise they'd have to figure out what their right-of-way would be, what their RCA dedication and everything else up front before they could figure out what their unit count would be. So they wouldn't have a way of saying, sure, this will be no more than 14, because until they do engineer drawings, they have no idea what that's going to be. So it's typically applied more often in situations where it's a family parcel and they have plenty of road infrastructure along their frontage, and they're trying to get 3 units out of their family land. That's what it was originally intended for, that kind of situation. We've had other examples where some of our smaller lots, or I don't want to say smaller, but the pieces that haven't been included, kind of the orphan pieces that haven't been included in other developments, have run across this as well. So this was just to make sure that they basically get the same rules applied to them that the other zoning districts allow.
Okay. And how likely is it for that, this is a dead-end road, right?
Yes, towards the west it is ultimately.
So how likely is it that the town will proceed with the straightening of the curve if it's just going to the lake, basically?
That's a really good question that I don't have a great answer to. It will be in our list of priorities, but I don't know how high up that list of priorities it will be. Getting the right-of-way, though, now means that even if it takes us 10 years or longer to get to that we have the ability to straighten it and to improve the situation, which is the biggest thing that we tend to look for, especially in these kind of outer edges of the town's jurisdiction.
Okay.
But to your point, part of the 19 acres is the pump station and the utilities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a stretch.
You know, it was purchased. You know, you still had to buy the land in order to kind of implement it. It's private land. It wasn't owned by the town, so we might end up doing something where there's a minimum average lot size or something. So, you know, it's about trying to maximize, especially if it ends up, you know, that road is constructed as part of this. That'll be a considerable cost towards the project. So it's a low number of lots as it is. So, you know, obviously trying to get that density is, you know, as much as we can while staying in the one-to-one realm is, you know, it has been important. So.
And to be clear, so your zoning is going to be which designation? The low-density rural transition?
The rezoning will be rural residential.
And that's 1 unit to 1 acre, or is it 1 to 5?
It's 1 unit per acre, and that would require a land use map amendment to the rural transition district.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that staff is working with the developer on, but
Wait.
1 unit per acre is what the RR means.
What was I thought I saw somewhere it was, what's 1 to 5? What's?
That's residential agricultural. That's the next lowest, and it's actually the lowest density that our ordinance allows or requires, I suppose. This is also part of its, so the pump station portion is in the town's jurisdiction already. It's already annexed, but the bulk of the property is in Wake County's jurisdiction. And currently it's zoned R80W, which means that they can have 1 unit per 2 acres.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the solar and the cool roofing materials. Would y'all be amenable to maybe somebody to looking at whether if the cool roofing is not feasible for whatever reason for this project, you would be willing to have at least one house with solar installed?
Yeah, absolutely. That was where, you know, the conversation has started to begin with. So if the cool roofing doesn't happen, then there will definitely be some sort of commitment. So we'll need to talk about it, and, you know, I'm not setting anything in stone here, but I think that would be probably the minimum that we would do.
Regarding the pond, if that pond is drained and a stream develops in place, can you still put your stormwater pond there?
No, and that's part of it. You know, we'll still go through the same normal process of waiting the full growing season to see what may or may not reform there. If a stream goes there, then it'll follow all the same, you know, regulations as any other buffered stream. So that's a TBD until that gets kind of get to that point. So,
if an intermittent stream develops, would you all be amenable to putting a 30-foot buffer on it?
an intermittent stream would,
I'm sorry, ephemeral stream.
if it's ephemeral, I guess the follow-up question would be, as far as allowable uses within said buffer, you know, currently stormwater is allowable.
In an ephemeral channel?
Well, we
Well,
don't,
ephemeral, right, it doesn't have a buffer typically.
so essentially that kind of goes away. You can do anything on that land.
Well, that's what I'm
Currently.
saying. Okay, so if it turns out to be ephemeral, you just plop the pond right there.
Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect the stream itself. If it comes back in the waters of the U.S., then, you know, we would still avoid any actual stream impacts. But yeah, we would likely still utilize the area around the stream for the stormwater pond, but I can certainly talk to my client about that. I don't think there would be an issue with agreeing to that as far as actual development or anything, because it's far enough away from where we intend on having any residential lots where that shouldn't cause any issue. We wouldn't want that to affect like the pollinator garden thing, where all of a sudden we can't get into that in order to make it a nicer product or something.
Are you all, to that point, are you all gonna develop a management plan and sort of a funding strategy for the management of a pollinator garden? I mean, that's not like a set it and forget it kind of thing. You're gonna get invasives coming in and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the company name that we had been talking to. Is Leaf something or other, but that was where that
Leaf and
Piedmont.
limb. Yeah,
Sorry again.
leaf and limb.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
And so then are you gonna have like HOA, specific portion of HOA dues going to funding and maintenance of that somehow?
Presumably, yeah.
Okay.
I can ask, and these were kind of ideas in the last couple of days that came about, so I'm not sure that all those thoughts have been worked through, but I mean that makes the most sense to me.
And sort of, because like, when it gets turned over to the residents, oftentimes things like, if the residents don't see the value in it and there's no enforcement, that will often be the first thing that goes if there's a money issue. So my concern is you will do this with the best of intentions and it sounds good, but over the long term, it's not going to be a sustainable thing. I mean, historically, Piedmont prairies or savannas or whatever you want to call them were maintained by fire. So, I mean, mowing approximates that, but they do take some maintenance. And then there will be questions of what if some portion of your species die off, then are you going to come back in and plant them, and what does that look like, and are you going to have monitoring time points to make sure you're getting to the end point that you envisioned when you started?
Yeah, those are great questions. One of those things that sounds great in theory when you see the kind of the brochures and everything, but I mean it's very practical questions, so we'll look into that. It'll all be included in that RCA area. So, I mean, long term, and that doesn't speak to all, the actual maintenance of the plant species and fire control and everything, but it wouldn't be area, it wouldn't just be HOA common area that, they could go in there in the future and say, yeah, screw it, we want to build a playground or something back here. It would still be RCA.
Right, yeah. I mean, it'd almost be, I don't know. I love pollinators. I love pollinator gardens, but it would almost be possibly better over the long term to try and approximate sort of a forest where you're going to get canopy trees, mid-story trees, understory trees, and an herb layer, and then just deal with the invasives as they come in. Do more of a restoration versus trying to maintain an open space, because it's going to want to convert. It's going to want to go through ecological succession to get back to whatever the adjacent stuff is. And if the Army Corps property is treed, you might get trees trying to come back in.
True.
So I don't know what the best, economically over the long term would be. But I mean, I think it's important to think, 10, 15, 20 years out.
Yeah, absolutely.
How that's going to be.
Yeah, I agree completely.
It could be that you could start it off as a wildflower area and handhold it through its succession so that you can reduce the amount of invasives going through there. But if you see native trees coming up, allow those to
Don't stop them, right?
Don't stop them, just allow that succession to continue going.
I love that idea, but you almost need a plan for that, to implement it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my questions was, the Leaf and Limb, was that specifically the company that he was intending on using? Because that did seem very formal and like they had a very, well-written plan versus, some projects that I've seen that just commit to a pollinator garden. And I think it's really just throwing wild seed flower mix out there and letting it go. So I think the intent is to, use those long-term plans so that it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing. But yeah, we'll dig in a lot more on that.
I appreciate that. Other issues from the board?
Just,
Okay.
I have a comment with the cool roofing thing versus the solar panels.
Yeah.
I know when I got solar panels on my house, one of the selling points was that it actually does cool your roof. So it's not going to, solar panels on top of the you know, the shingles that are cooling it aren't going to negate the effect. It will just increase it in that
Okay.
area.
Okay.
So you could actually do both, so that maybe, you know, one side of the roof that doesn't have the panels on it
Still has the
still
cool
has the
materials.
cool
Right.
roof shingles on there, helping reduce the
Okay.
temperature.
Okay.
Just
Yeah, that was
2 cents.
that was literally my first thought, was like, well, do those things contradict each other? You know, if we commit to one, but then we also commit to all being cool roofs, do you have a, you know, well, no, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or it's just a waste of money or something, and you've covered up the, you know,
Yeah.
usefulness of it. So
There is that.
yeah, no, I appreciate that input, because it's a little bit new to me. Cool.
I saw a comment in the packet about, there was a concern, I think, from the residents on the west side about the size of the buffer in between the properties. What size are you gonna do? What are your thoughts on that?
So we have a 20-foot perimeter buffer on the west side. I was not, my partner led that meeting, and what he told me was that the discussion was, I think the folks' house is about right around here, and they have a pool in the backyard, and I think that was the main concern, was in that backyard area, not being up against it. So we think that they'll be, you know, happy to see all the land back in here if that's in the vicinity of where her actual
Okay,
house is. But as far as up through here where the meat of the residential would be, there is a street stub plan for that property line. So, you know, even if you were to stay 75 feet away, you're still going to have a road plugged up right to her anyway. So, you know, we would like to follow the UDO for the perimeter buffer width for where we actually have homes, but then, and you know, we could, like currently, the 200-foot buffer off of the Army Corps land, it's really a sort of an arbitrary line, because we're planning on giving so much more as it is. And it could be the same thing here, where we come through and say, well, south of, you know, X number of feet down the property line, we're providing a 150-foot buffer, whereas on the northern point, and the average is 75 feet or whatever it is. So, you know, that could definitely be something that we kind of look into as we kind of finalize these conditions. Definitely looking forward to getting comments from the town. I think those come back on Friday. So coming here before getting those comments is a little bit trickier. But, you know, once we get those comments, we'll be able to really kind of bring this full circle.
okay, and, you know, potentially, so the part of the core land is in the game lands program, and the commission does recommend actually 100, it's not a regulatory thing, but they recommend 150 yard hunting safety buffer. So if you can get as far away and maybe even you know, plant a tree line or something, just to buffer as much as possible.
Yeah.
That would probably be helpful, because I'm sure these folks are not gonna maybe appreciate people shooting guns in their backyard, essentially.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and we're aware of that regulation. We had originally, you know, we considered, well, do we add language to that condition to say no residential lots will be within at least 400 feet. I mean, this dimension here, I think this, you know, to that corner, it was like over 500 feet. To there, it was like, you know, scaling it out, it was between 400 and 450. So we're getting pretty close to that 150 yard mark. Obviously, you know, we're kind of tying to the corner of that parcel where the town's property is. So that's kind of where the layout, you know, kind of worked itself in. So, you know, we feel like if we're providing 400, that's a, you know, pretty good chunk. But we also don't want to have to, you know, the undisturbed thing, you know, could get a little dicey. That's why, you know, we're staying south of the pond with the undisturbed terminology. But other than that, you know, and if we need to add that condition back about residential lots not being within X number of feet, we can do that.
As far as the accessory dwelling units go, those don't count towards the density?
I don't think they have any bearing.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that's entirely in order to encourage people to actually build ADUs. And those are sometimes for something as small as a converted garage into an apartment, or something larger, but they don't count towards the maximum density in any subdivision in order to encourage that.
And just to be clear, that has nothing, we're not doing that for any, you know,
They're
trying
not
to.
building them, they're just not prohibiting them.
Correct, right. And that came from an earlier project that we'd worked on where it was a similar size project with, you know, very large custom built homes. And when this was kind of when the affordability plan was still in its earlier days, and meeting with the staff member, it was, well, you know, these, you know, $2 million homes or whatever they might be, you know, it doesn't make sense for one to be, you know, drastically different than the rest. And so, you know, a certain number didn't make sense for affordability, but his alternative to just being able to offer something was that the HOA would not prohibit. That way, you know, you might be able to get somebody come pay rent, or, you know, live in an above garage apartment or something like that. And it's not moving the needle a whole lot, but it's at least not prohibiting something that could be useful.
Okay, and then if it was a separate like structure, then that would have to fall under like setbacks and other kind of regulations.
Yep, we have a section in the ordinance that deals with all of that kind of stuff. We have maximum sizes in relation to the existing building, all that kind of thing. Okay. Generally speaking, what we find these are built for is for kids that are old enough to be adults, but maybe need their independence, but aren't ready to buy their own home. And instead of renting, they would rather pay their parents a little bit and save up enough money to buy their own home off the bat. Or, you know, maybe they've launched and things haven't worked out as well and they need to move back home for a short period of time. The other thing that we find happens a lot is as parents get older, they sometimes need a little more assistance with their lives than they necessarily want. And this is a nice in-between point for them. They still have all their independence, but they live close enough that if something happens, their children can help.
Okay. Okay. Other questions or comments from the board? Anybody like to tweak anything on their list of suggested? At some point, are these going to get transferred over to like our standard sheet?
Yes, I'll do that after the meeting.
Okay.
I just don't have the time to do it right now.
Yeah.
That'll happen, and then I'll also get a revised set of conditions from the applicant when they resubmit. Okay. So, as he said, he hasn't gotten my comments back yet. I did send my environmental recommendations early just so they would have those for this meeting. And I'm very pleased to say all but one, and that was the cool roofs, has been added in there. So
20%.
yeah, oh, that one, yeah, but
okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to accept the conditions or to recommend the conditions as they have recommended to us?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Jason, second?
Point,
Okay.
with the condition that I added about the cool roofs and solar.
It's on there.
It's on there?
Yeah.
Just make sure that that is included in our recommendation.
I'll make sure that that gets added into the list.
Okay. All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you
much
guys so
for
much.
your time.
Have a good night.
Okay. All right, moving along. Shelley, we have Shelley. Twice.
Another hand.
Suzanne, I just want to chime in. That was like peak EAB discussion right there. I've ever heard, so it's a way to go. All you guys.
Somebody remind me what I'm doing first. Do I have
Video light update?
Sweet. Okay, that's what I was hoping. I just wanted to.
I don't think we mind if you want to change the order.
I'm just trying to remember what I have going on. So
I'm sorry to interrupt real quick. I don't know if it was how you were hooked up, but these monitors kept flicking on and off. I just want to let you know.
That is very
seem
strange.
stable
I
right now.
appreciate it.
Okay,
It may have been that I was trying to mark up one of the maps at the same time that somebody was talking to you guys, because I was trying to add arrows and like north arrows and
it
stuff.
was like 2 and then 1 would be on, okay, I just wanted to.
I'll let IT know, although I think they're probably listening right now. And so, as you guys may remember, it's almost a year ago, I guess, we brought a whole bunch of potential lighting amendments to the board after working for several months with several different members on a small subcommittee. We had Kim Pearson at the time, John Garrison, and Suzanne, were you on that one? Or was that Adam? That was Patrick, I think. Patrick isn't able to be here today, but he did tell me he looked at it and he thinks it looks great. Kimberly, what I invited, even though she's no longer on the board, she had a prior commitment and couldn't be here, but she said she looked at it and she really appreciates the work that we've done. There were several things that were originally recommended by the board that we were not able to incorporate. Essentially, those were, if you remember, there were some zones that were recommended, and that was part of the dark sky recommendations. And then there was something called initial allowed lumens or something like that, that basically gave us a total count of the permitted lumens for each site based on a variety of categories. Unfortunately, at this point, just because of our staffing levels, those are a little beyond the scope of what staff can handle at the moment. And we didn't think that you wanted us to wait on all of this until we could get everything implemented. So what we brought forward to you is honestly 95% of what y'all asked for. Some of it's been slightly reworded. When we took out the zones, I had to kind of find some things that accomplished the same goal, but without relying on the particular zone language. So I'm going to go through here. Anything that's in bold has been added. Anything that has been struck through is proposed to be deleted. Staff is planning to take this to town council in October, to planning board and town council. They both hear it. If these are adopted, we plan to write the ordinance for it to say that they will be effective as of January 1st. And that's just to give some time to make sure that I have plenty of opportunity to retrain our staff on the new options and go over everything and answer questions. I have met with several of our staff members. They have a pretty good understanding of it, but we just want to make sure that we're not messing it up from the beginning. So, as a part of this, we changed the purpose and intent section to more closely match what the dark sky sample ordinance explained. We did tweak things a little bit. So we changed it from help protect the environment to wildlife and habitat. That seemed a little more specific, and it addressed some concerns from some of our staff members that it was a little too broad. And then I think there was an extra clause after curtail light pollution that seemed redundant. So, and we generally just remove redundant information. So after that was inserted, it'll still say lighting should be provided in areas of heavy vehicle and pedestrian use and areas that are dangerous if unlit, such as stairs, intersections, or changes in grade. We've changed the first clause. It says outdoor lighting should adequately serve the site while minimizing negative impacts on surrounding properties. I'm going to turn this off so it's prettier. We've changed it from any development to site plan and non-residential master subdivision plans. And that's simply because we do not regulate the lighting on single family houses or townhouses, because trying to tell people what they can and cannot have on their own house is just not, it's so painful I would not be here the next day. people like to have their control, and that's completely understandable. What we do regulate within the subdivisions for residential subdivisions is the lighting on amenity centers, especially any parking lots within the amenity centers. Those are considered non-residential within an overall, the non-residential site within a residential subdivision. And we do regulate the lighting for any kind of monument signage or anything like that. So those things are always going to be underneath of this. They'll always follow through.
What about like multifamily, like facilities?
Multifamily comes in as a site plan because it's all one owner. And so that was the reason that we changed that language.
Okay.
But that's a great question. I didn't say that, so how could you know? So we've changed from the type of unit, the type of things that are associated with that. We took off non-cutoff because later on, non-cutoff fixtures, because later on in the document, it prohibits anything but full cutoff fixtures, period, stop, end of story. Right now, the ordinance does allow non-cutoff fixtures as long as they meet a certain wattage, which is no longer even useful. So we just got rid of that completely across the board. We've added bug rating as one of the things that has to be specified on our lighting plans. We've changed wattage to lumens throughout the entire thing. So nobody should ever talk to me about wattage on lights ever again. I'm really excited about that part. And then we've added a sentence that said all lighting fixtures proposed shall be high efficiency and possess LED lamp technology. And that's honestly the way that everyone has been going for the better part of 6 or 7 years anyway. I think the last time that I saw a different type of lighting lamp inside of it was probably 2015, maybe 2016. And the prices on LEDs just keep coming down, so they just make more and more economic sense to everybody. They last forever, and they're super efficient, so almost nobody wants to use them anyway.
Does that preclude, like in certain types of, I don't know if anybody in these types of developments would ever put them up, but if they wanted to have like just the regular screw-in socket?
You can buy LED screw-in sockets.
Yeah, so would that preclude them from putting in the sockets and using an LED bulb? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
I mean, anybody can do exactly that, and sometimes those are the easiest ones for us to deal with because that means if they put in the wrong color bulb, all they have to do is go out and buy another $10 bulb instead of an entire fixture with special diodes and stuff.
Yeah.
So, does not preclude that in the least. Lamp just literally is the technical term for the little piece that that projects light.
Okay.
So, in addition, we just tweaked some language on the next one down. So, it used to just say foot candles shall be shown at additional levels, and now we're saying we just made it a little bit more specific. Throughout the whole document, we've gone from must to shall. Must is for casual language. Shall is for legal language. So you'll see a bunch of those. We added a clarification on here, and this was a suggestion from either Kimberly or John, that so what's called a cross section is required for any new development going in, and basically what that says is it's a flat drawing that shows on one side your project and on the other side the closest house or building to you, and should reflect the topo, like if you were just to cut it away, and should also reflect any trees or sheds or other things in between you and that house, so that when I'm looking at a plan, I can get a better idea of whether the lights from your new development are going to glare into your neighbor's back windows and what needs to be done to accommodate that. If there's 50 feet of red cedars on the ground between you and them, you don't have to do anything as long as they're your red cedars. If there's nothing between you and them, you've at least got to put a shield on that keeps all the light from going out the back. There are other things that can also be done, but that's just one example. So And this is just saying, this tweak that we've added just says that there's no need to take the foot candle readings, so the actual measurements that we get on the lighting plan, and overlay those on this. It's really just a stick drawing, basically. It's a very simple drawing to give me an idea of, is your building 10 feet up from them? Is it 10 feet below them? Where is this in relation? Next, we've got some changes to the illumination standards. This is one thing that we could not, that staff is not recommending. Now, in the staff report, Amanda Bunce will actually be presenting these to town council. Actually, I just jumped ahead, I apologize. So we've requested that the developer provide the name of the software program used to determine the lighting parameters and to generate the lighting plan that staff reviews, just so that we know if there's any discrepancy, or if we find out that it's a 20-year-old program, maybe it doesn't actually have these lights in there the way it should, that kind of thing. And then y'all recommended that we reduce the lighting levels for multifamily and retail to 2, an average of 2 across the board instead of 4. Those are areas that are particularly busy at night after dark. And when we drove through, we actually have a couple members who live in town, and they drove through at my request and stopped and looked around several apartment complexes and shopping centers that I know for a fact meet our ordinance as it stands. And they told me that they would feel some concern about their safety if the lighting levels were reduced any further at this point. So maybe that's something we come back and take a look at later when we've had a better chance to actually go out and take measurements. But for now, staff is just concerned that we will end up receiving a lot of complaints about potential safety issues in those areas. Now, there are a couple things that we've added at the end that might help with some of this, but at least while businesses are going and things like that, we feel like this is a reasonable level to stick with. Of course, reasonable is always in the eye of the beholder, but we do have to account for the residents who, you know, are used to brighter light and are uncomfortable and maybe more likely to look at their personal danger.
I actually appreciated that, and I appreciated that you separated out the bicycle parking, so thank you.
You're welcome. And partly that's because bicycle parking is frequently located near doors, but it's not always located near doors. And for those situations where it's not located near doors, it doesn't necessarily need to have the same lighting standards that a door does or an entry exit or service area does. We felt like service areas and ATMs really needed to have that same level of lighting. And to be totally honest, I've probably done a half dozen lighting plans for new ATMs, especially those standalone ones in shopping centers, and we always have far lower lighting standards than the industry standard for those. They always want gas station canopy style lighting around them, and I always have to spend about 2 months explaining to them that that's not going to happen. So we were really concerned about the amount of pushback, and honestly the number of people who might feel uncomfortable standing at an ATM at night getting money out. Because if you think about it, when those are, you have 2 problems with ATMs. If they are too brightly lit, you can't see anything around you while you're standing under the light. So that's one of the reasons why we don't want to let them have their industry standard numbers, is because it actually makes it more dangerous if somebody is outside of kind of that curtain of light, if you will. But if they're too poorly lit, then people don't feel comfortable enough walking up to them because they don't feel like they can actually see far enough out. And everything with lighting is a perception to a large degree. So those same people actually went and double checked some of those ATMs and looked around and felt like they were safe without being underlit. So at least for now, that's where we're staying on that one, or that's what staff is recommending. The town council can adopt whatever they want to. but this is what staff is recommending. And then the uniformity ratio was recommended to be reduced to 2 to 1. And we have a very difficult time already making the uniformity ratio 4 to 1. And what that just means is that your lowest number, it sets the bar, that's the 1 on your lighting plan. And your highest, brightest number can be no more than 4 times that. So if we're talking that you have a spot on your lighting plan that is 0.8, and this happens all the time, in one of these areas, then, and they're broken up by the type of area that they are, so it's not the entire site. But if you have a spot in, say, your parking lot that is much dimmer than the rest, then you don't want to have other spots that are super, super bright. So what you're going for with this uniformity ratio is to keep that light pretty even. We have almost never gotten 2 to 1 on a project. Even the very best design project that I've worked on is about 2.5, 2.6, and I went back and looked at a whole bunch of my old site plans, just out of curiosity. So this would be incredibly difficult for lighting engineers to meet. It's something that theoretically is a really good idea, but we're not certain we could actually get it to be implemented, and we don't want to have a standard that we can't actually meet. So staff is not recommending that change. But like Katie said, we did separate out the bicycle parking because that just made sense, especially when they're, you know, further off somewhere. There's a bunch of stuff that we did not change, such as the design requirements. We did take off the maximum height for non-cut off lights, so the ones that you can actually see the lamp inside of, because we're not allowing those anymore. So there's no need to have a maximum, like we took out every reference to cutout lights. Full cutoff fixtures have a maximum height of 35 feet, except for certain specific situations. These are mostly athletic field type situations, where if kids are going to be playing at night or adults are going to be playing at night, there's no way to adequately light an athletic field with 30-foot tall poles. We did require house side shields based on those cross sections to avoid any kind of glare. And basically what that is if you imagine holding a shoebox, and the bottom of the shoebox is where the light comes out, and the house side shield is basically just a piece of metal that goes around the back of it that prevents light from coming out that side and going towards the houses closest by. Now sometimes you have LEDs that have kind of looks like an egg carton, honestly, that goes up inside of it and does basically the same thing but closer to the individual diodes, but they both do the same type of thing. It's a physical piece of plastic or metal that keeps that light from trespassing. These two images are going to be completely removed from the UDO, and that's because they were illustrating that maximum height for for lights that weren't full cutoff, so we don't need them anymore. We also took out any reference to wattage in these old images, and I cleaned them up because some of them were scanned in from back in the days when we drew things and put tape labels on them and stuff. I figured that wasn't a good look at this point. So that's really all the change there. We've also got some things that were capitalized and shouldn't have been, or weren't capitalized and should been, and just some general cleanup. There is one thing that we added, which is that poles should be kept at least 20 feet away from the trunk of any large type tree and at least 10 feet away from the trunk of any small type tree, except in cases where the planning director determines it's not reasonable and practical. And that's because we've had a handful of situations over the years where somebody has 9.5 feet, but they can't quite make 10 feet. And it just seems silly that 6 inches can throw that when it's, you know, it's a dogwood and it probably will be fully underneath the light beam anyway. So it's just to give us that extra little bit of flexibility for when things just kind of, otherwise it would require a whole redesign. It just seems silly. Skipping on down, none of this stuff has changed. So spillover, light, and glare control is where we are next. This is where we took out any reference to non-cutoff lights and things of that nature and kind of reworked some things. So all fixtures shall be fully shielded, full cutoff type fixtures with a concealed lamp and light source except as otherwise stated in this section. We have also added the bug rating system, which is an acronym for backlight. So the stuff that comes off the back of the fixture. Uplight, so anything that's above the horizontal kind of plane of the light itself. So anything that goes up towards the sky. And glare, which is kind of these higher level light beams that come out, and that's what feels like it shoots you in the eye when you're driving at night. Feels like it shoots me in the eye anyway. So we've added those definitions in here, and then typically when you have bug lighting requirements, you're using the zones that we talked about earlier, and those are land use zones. And part of the reason that it was difficult to implement is that we don't always have a super clear-cut area for, you know, a lot of times our shopping centers blend in with our residential neighborhoods or things like that, and those are actually separate areas within the bug or within the zone system. So that's part of the reason why we weren't quite comfortable with this yet. But this typically requires using those. So what I did is I actually went and looked at the situations that those zones required, and I took out the standards that most closely fit and basically summarized where they should be applied. So bug rating goes from 0 to 5. 0 means no light, 5 means lots and lots of light. A 3 is allowed for backlighting for fixtures that are located 20 feet or less from a public right-of-way. At 20 feet or less from a public right-of-way is actually right from the dark sky standards. It's just that the 3 is a situation where it's allowed kind of for both denser residential, so apartment complexes, and for commercial and industrial type situations. So I just kind of summarized that into a standard that staff can more easily understand. And this doesn't mean that it's going to apply to every light on the property. It means just those pole lights that are closest to the road will have to meet that standard. We also added a backlight rating of 2 for fixtures located 20 feet or less from the property line of a residential use or vacant property with residential zoning. So that way you still don't have all that extra light trespass on your neighbors, and that's still consistent with those zones. It's just easier to emphasize. Uplight is all that light that goes up, like I told you, straight up into the sky. We're not allowing any of it. Every one of our fixtures has to be a 0 because all of our fixtures should be full cutoff and shouldn't be leaking any light up into the sky anyway. And then glare is kind of the annoying or visually disabling stuff. And we're saying 1 for fixtures located 20 feet or less from a public right-of-way. So a little bit. And then 0 for fixtures located 20 feet or less from a residential use or vacant property zoned residential. And this is just a diagram that I had to redraw because all of them are copyright stuff, but it gives you an idea of what backlight, uplight, and glare mean. This is actually not the right version. This is supposed to be completely clear, but dark is uplight, slightly lighter is backlight, and then these hatched areas are where the glare comes from. And this is a number that staff doesn't have to calculate. It's on each fixture specification sheet. It just says bug rating, boom, 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 and that's all I have to do. Again, we swapped out wattage for lumens. And this whole wattage to lumens thing is really tricky because no matter where you look online, every calculator has a different number. So what I actually ended up doing is going through about 25 different site plans over from the last 8 years or so that staff all agreed were well lit, but not overly lit and not excessive or painful. And looked at what those specific fixtures said they provided as far as lumens. And then we came up with kind of the middle ground number, something that the town's fixtures can still meet, but that isn't excessively bright or excessively low. And we actually pulled our brightest plan just to see like what the comparison is, and it's more than twice this number. So 15,500 lumens is what we've come up with for pole lights. Actually, for any full cutoff fixture.
What was the brightest plan? Just out of curiosity.
37,000 lumens per pole.
And which development was it?
Not saying.
Okay. I just wanted to go see.
I'm not calling people out, but if you drive around town, I'm sure you can find it pretty quickly.
Oh, okay.
You can just stay on main roads too.
No further information required. Thank you.
Nope. So we'll skip down here a little bit. Building mounted lighting is different. It still has to be full cutoff, but those can't exceed 2,500 lumens. That's still reasonably bright for like a wall pack or honestly a fixture like that outside, but it's not excessively bright. Now again, this is just apartments, non-residential, and any signs and amenity centers. And that was done using the exact same process from the same plans. And then gas station canopy lights. So gas station canopies are allowed to be much brighter than most things, but their brightness is done by clustering a number of lights together in a much closer space. So for each pump, you typically have two sides that you can use, and each side is allowed 2 fixtures right above it. So similar to this diagram that you're seeing, which the main change on this one was we took off all mention of watts. So what we did was we don't get a ton of gas stations, but the ones that we have gotten in that we thought looked good, the brightest one on there was actually 10,550 lumens. And that's a weird number to put in an ordinance, so we rounded up slightly to 11,000, which is still less than what a pole light is allowed, but is the highest that we saw that looked good. So we decided to move forward with that. Again, we've changed out everything for shall, lots of shalls. And then there's just another note about building mounted lighting in regional recreational complexes, and we stayed with the same number, still 2,500 lumens. I'm not entirely sure why we had a different section for that. And then these are additional controls for the project, and this is really where some of the additional meat and potatoes came in. We're requiring that controls be provided that automatically extinguish all outdoor lighting when sufficient daylight is available using a control device or a timer system, or photoelectric switch, astronomical time switch, any of those, all with battery or backup power device, so that we don't have any more lights that are just running in the middle of the day. Sometimes things break, that's understandable, but this will just mean that they don't accidentally get left on all the time. And these devices are not particularly expensive when I talk to developers, so they have no problem with that. And then for non-residential uses, the lumens for each fixture shall be reduced by at least 30% no later than 1 hour after the business is closed to the public, except for lighting reductions, or except for the following categories. No lighting reductions are required for the following categories. So if a site contains no more than 2 fixtures, It does happen sometimes. It's rare, but generally those are small personal businesses. If the code required, for any code required lighting for steps, stairs, walkways, and building entrances, anything that the building code requires for those. Any motion activated lighting. So if they've decided that they're going to rely entirely on motion activated, perfect. That means that most of the time that light will be off. Lighting approved by a special use permit in which times of operation are specifically identified. We don't get a lot of those, but we do sometimes get them. And that's just one thing that we wanted to make clear. There are some businesses like pharmacies that operate on a 24-hour basis. It's perfectly reasonable that they would need adequate lighting at night, all night long. Hospitals are the same way sometimes. And then we added a caveat because we always end up running into situations that nobody ever would have imagined that we would come up with. So we realized we needed something that would allow us a little wiggle room just in case there's something we haven't thought of. And that's just to say that in the opinion of the Technical Review Committee staff, lighting levels, when in the opinion of the TRC, lighting levels must be maintained to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the community. I could not give you an example of what that would be because I don't know, but I do know that if we didn't have this statement, it would happen next week. Or the month after it goes into effect. And I would be like, oh, so I guess we get to go back to council. And then there are several lighting definitions in here that just may be unfamiliar to most people. We had originally talked about adding them to the full definitions list at the back of the UDO, but that seemed like it was unnecessarily unwieldy. Yeah. So we left them here the way that y'all recommended it. We took out any of them that were not being used at this point, and there were several that were originally intended for having the zones and the other issues that we've already addressed. So we took out anything that hasn't been used. But there are several in here that are fairly common and several that are going to be definitely new to a bunch of people. So any questions, comments, changes you would like to see?
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, John.
I have one comment.
We need to thank Shelley.
She just did.
I have one comment thinking
Yes,
of
sir.
the future and being very optimistic. You have in here Gas Pump Island.
Mm-hmm.
What if we start switching over to EVs and there turns out to be EV charging stations? And there's this loophole of, oh, this isn't a gas pump. This is an EV charging station.
That's a good point.
That is a good point.
Oh,
Maybe it becomes gas pump /
Okay. So I'll make a note on this that staff takes a look at that and thinks that through.
Yeah.
Those are not always under canopies the way that gas pumps are. Now, maybe in the future they will be, assuming that EV charging ever gets fast enough for people to just walk into the convenience store and back out.
Pay for it.
But at the moment, they're not. I'll add a note that says that's something we should think about. But I don't know the answer for you yet. That may be something that I come back to you with at a separate point after we get these adopted. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
It would be interesting to hear, because, you know, DOT is doing the fast charging corridors, you know, and I know those are going to be private businesses, but like what those folks are envisioning their charging areas to look like, that might help with that question.
I do know that I've heard many complaints of safety around them because, you know, someone single coming up and, you know, pumping and you can't see around. So there's definitely a purpose for light being on those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I foresee that happening in the future because of the safety concern.
Yeah.
So that's why I was thinking, we might want to
That's a really good
throw that in there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So I had 3 comments real quick, if you don't mind.
Yes,
One
please.
is, I think I mentioned lighting in the very first EAB pre-COVID that we were at. I'm not sure if you guys were on the board at the time, I mentioned it, and I'm so proud that this has come to fruition here. The second thing is, I would encourage staff and you guys or whoever to make a flyer, like a one-page thing about these changes, because I think for the public and also other municipalities and counties to kind of summarize this, something I would love to hand this to the people at the Triangle J Council of Government, other municipalities, and that hand them these changes and saying, here's what we're doing in Apex. You guys should copy this because it's a regional problem, not just a local thing. And the third thing is, I know the International Dark Sky people have a Dark Sky community certification thing that after passing this, we may want to think about applying to and kind of making it official as far as that goes.
It's pretty stringent requirements.
I'm not sure this will meet it, but if it does, oh, it won't, okay, well, maybe not then. But
We can always try. And
if it does meet
Yeah,
it,
well,
it
they
would-
find out how bad we are.
it'd be some good press as far as that goes too, and good
How
vibes.
far off we are.
So I would encourage that if it's possible. Thanks.
John, do you feel like you can make the flyer? I like that idea.
Or does anybody else feel like expressing their artistic skills either way?
I have no
I
idea.
would, I would love to do it, but I don't have the time. I'm happy to proofread anything.
I know there are some other communities that have adopted special lighting ordinances, because that's where I got some of my initial thoughts on this. But we ended up doing a lot of copying from the Dark Sky proposal.
Yeah, I just think because we're local, are we the first one in the Triangle that's done something this comprehensive?
Other places have done some things, but ours is fairly different from most of those. Nightdale just did a lighting revision,
Okay.
but one thing that's different is they actually have lighting minimums instead of maximums,
Oh.
which I had never heard of until recently, and I actually had a project that they thought that all of our maximums were minimums because they're fairly low, and from where they're from, it's all the other way around. And I could not figure out why we were miscommunicating as badly as we were until I had the UDO up on a Zoom call, and he goes, "I just realized those are maximums." I said, "Okay, that explains every single part of this." Because, we work really well with most people, but if you're out of state, you might not know. Trying to think of who else. They're the one, Wake Forest and Nightdale are the two that pop into my head, but I don't.
Asheville got some.
They did, that's true. And we looked at that.
Patrick will make the flyer.
I will commit to passing out a flyer if there is one that exists. Just
Well, I guess I would need some guidance on what we want in it. Just
Highlights.
Well, I do have to just let you know that it would have to be reviewed by legal to make sure that it's, and they're actually, as long as what we're saying is accurate to what the UDO is actually showing, they're really great to work with. It's just that we can't, remember when Mr. Jensen was bringing out his flyer? Well, he had already helped us write a packet that had been reviewed by legal and had gotten everybody's sign off. It didn't go quite as far as he wanted, and that was the reason why we had to tell him we needed him to stop. But if you guys come up with a flyer, like a one-page thing, and you send it to me, and I can send it to legal, then I am more than happy to give it to them, even if all it says is Apex has gotten rid of watts and we're moving to lumens, and we're doing full cutoff lights, so there's no more upward lighting.
I can try to put something together.
Okay,
I think it'd be awesome.
thank you, sir.
And maybe something that describes like the uplight thing too, like and good best practices
Yeah.
for like just homeowners too. I think that would be also useful
Yeah.
for to pass out like Peak Fest too.
What the benefits are to the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then can we push that on social media once it gets,
If legal approves it, then I don't see any problem with that.
like, blasted on the town's various?
Information to make it look cool.
They might be, yeah.
Make it look cool.
Branding thing.
Yep, they do a great job. So, yeah.
If you guys have the information, maybe a rough draft it out, they could make it look.
That might be better, cause I have less skills than Katie.
I have 0.
I
By the
can't
way-
even draw a straight line with a ruler.
Right. They'll make sure that it meets all of our branding stuff and it matches all of our
Yeah.
colors. And,
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
okay. Yeah, if you just want to put the information down,
Yeah,
and
that might be a better way to do it, yeah.
thank you, John.
To show my excitement, by the way, to you guys, I've drafted a op-ed for the paper. First sentence, the first sentence is, Apex, North Carolina is lit right now. And nice little pun, but I left a blank spot about the ordinance. I didn't know what was going to be in it yet, so I don't know. I'm gonna fill it in now, but I'm really excited. I'm gonna share it in the venues I have possible, and they often print like from elected officials some kind of longer form op-ed. So it's pretty snappy, but I don't. It's blank right now on the part about this. But
Well, it hasn't been approved yet, has it?
I don't care about that. For me, you know, I don't have to listen to that. But the things that are official, we'll need to do it that way. But yeah.
Okay. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Wake County Land Cover Analysis and Tree Canopy Assessment. It's a very long name. It is much simpler sounding than that. I sent you guys all the link to it. I hope everybody was able to look at it. The two people mentioned here, Tim Maloney and Bill Schroyer from Wake County, will both be coming to present to Town Council. I have stolen their slides for today. So if you tune into the meeting on the 26th, you'll see very similar slides. And this is just because they did such a great job. Now, Suzanne emailed me and asked me to make sure that there were comparisons to Wake County and Apex in here, and there are. So it doesn't go through every single step in the document just because that's a lot of information to put in here, but it does give some pretty good overviews. So the funding for this project, and this was done entirely through Wake County, they coordinated every step of it, was from the American Rescue Plan Act. There's $5.7 billion directly available to North Carolina and $217 million in state and local recovery funds to Wake County. So the funding for this came straight out of that $217 million. Wake County's primary goals for all of their ARPA funding was to target public health needs. Their secondary goal was to look into things that would impact economic impacts that have been spurred on by the pandemic, systemic community challenges, and planning and preparation for future events. And this analysis falls very, very firmly into those last two. We're going to be able to use it to look at a lot of our very common community challenges throughout the whole triangle as we grow. Apex is heads and shoulders above everybody else as far as that growth rate goes, but they're catching up in a lot of places. And then I'm going to be able to use this for the hazard mitigation plan further on. We're going to be able to use this to evaluate our stormwater requirements in the future, look more closely at a lot of those things. In this particular situation, the public health emphasis is looked at from the environmental benefits, so the things like clean air and clean water that they provide, that trees provide rather, as well as the mental and emotional benefits. I'm sure you guys have heard some of this stuff, but people regularly have lower levels of depression, lower levels of heart disease, stroke, and better outcomes when they are affected by those things, lower levels of diabetes, way fewer suicides, anxiety for people is lower when they're able to even just see trees and green space out a window. They don't even necessarily have to go outside and interact with it. They just have to be able to see it. Going out and interacting with it is the next step up and has even better benefits. So Wake County's board has a variety of goals, just like the town council has a variety of goals for the town, and we try to make sure that our projects kind of align with those goals. For Wake County, this one checked the box for community health and vitality and growth and sustainability. The scope of this project and the purpose of it was to produce a very robust and measurable data set talking about land cover, both for 2010, which is the year that we started with, and for 2020. And it's to quantify the reality of tree loss, like the actual tree loss within Wake County between those 2 years. It also identifies priority planting areas that will support environmental, social, and health benefits, and provide actionable data for all the municipalities to be able to use, and data that's not just at the county level, but specific to us. The document I sent you guys is just Apex's version, but Wake County has an overall one as well, and every municipality in the county got one of these. The consultant that was used was Davie Resource Group. They're extremely well known in the tree world. They have a resource group that is separate but kind of under the main umbrella of their arborist and tree treatment group as well, and they work together pretty closely. The project team consisted mostly of staff from Planning, Environmental Services, and Facilities Design in Wake County. There were also a couple of cities, Cary, Morrisville, and Raleigh, that lent staff to do additional things, and then representatives, including moi, from the 12 core municipalities also spent time evaluating and giving suggestions. On Apex's team was also Jenny Jessen, who's one of our GIS specialists. She's done a whole bunch of the really cool maps and things that you've seen on the website within the last couple months, or year, I guess. Diane Ken, who's the planning director as well, and Phil Barnes, who is a registered arborist for the electric department and actually oversees the tree cap program. The first part of this is a land cover analysis. Now, land cover analysis is basically taking existing aerial imagery and breaking it down using a computer to basically analyze the colors that come through that aerial imagery. That's a very quick and dirty way of describing it, but it is very computer intensive. The imagery that was decided on was the National Agriculture Imagery Program. This is pretty consistent. Lots and lots of people use this. It has a great resolution. I think if I remember right, this is either at the 1 or 5 meter resolution, so it's pretty impressive. And it's already set up to have this kind of analysis run on it. What we're looking for is impervious surface, tree canopy, water bodies, and barren land areas. So barren land is dirt. Impervious surface is concrete, asphalt, and buildings, generally speaking. You know what tree canopy is, and then of course water bodies or lakes, rivers, etc. One of the things that this analysis lets you do is also, especially with this resolution of imagery, it lets you look into the forest health. They can actually analyze the colors on the leaves in the, it's cool stuff. I was blown away when I first heard about this, but they can actually look at the colors of the leaves on trees, particularly in the summer when they're supposed to be at full vibrancy, and determine whether or not they're yellowing earlier, they have additional brown tips to them, that kind of thing, and give you an idea of how healthy the canopy is in a particular area. It also allows you to measure the amount of tree canopy that you have in a particular area. The benefits that came with this and the possible things that we can use this to treat, some of them are the urban heat island effect, stormwater, and social equity. One of the things that, as an unfortunate side effect of affordable housing, is typically put on very small lots that don't have a lot of space for trees. And so even though the people living in an affordable housing project have the least amount of income to put towards heating and cooling, they also have the least amount of available space to plant trees or shrubs to do the passive cooling that comes along with that. So this is something that we can look at and say, okay, are there places near some of our lower income neighborhoods or affordable housing areas that we can maybe work with people to plant trees on? The county overall has about 54% tree canopy. I was actually kind of surprised by that. It's a pretty healthy number. And considering the amount of growth that we've had over the last decade, I honestly thought it was going to be lower than that. A lot of it, so there's also a category in here for vegetation, which is not trees, so shrubs, grass, that kind of thing. And I was surprised that they could tell the difference between the two that easily, but apparently they can. And again, we've got our impervious surface, bare ground, and open water. Bare ground and open water accounted for about 7% of the entire county, which I honestly thought that would be higher, if for no other reason than the amount of construction leaves a lot of bare soil. So that's a pretty, reasonable amount. Apex is at the top just because we're in alphabetical order, and well. So we currently have about 50% canopy. About 20% of our town is impervious surface. One thing to point out is this is looking at our entire planning jurisdiction, so both the town and the ETJ, but not any of the pieces outside of the ETJ in Wake County. Our vegetation, so where we don't have canopy or impervious, we've got about 23% vegetation, which looking at these numbers is honestly about average. Our bare ground is about 5%, and that's consistent with the high rate of growth that we have in the town. The only places that have a higher percentage than us are Holly Springs, Rollsville, Wendell, and Zebulon, and those are all growing ridiculously as well. They're also much smaller than we are for the most part. Sadly, Lake Jordan does not count towards our open water amount. The unincorporated portions of the county are at 60% canopy, 6% impervious, 24% vegetation, and 4 and 6% for open water and bare ground. They analyzed this with a bunch of different ways of chopping up geography. So they looked at all the planning jurisdictions for the different towns. They looked at our census boundaries, which is a little bit different. So that included our block groups and the tracts as well. They looked at watersheds, which is what this map is of, and then parks and open space and some municipal transition areas, which we do not have in Apex, but some of the other towns do. Next part is our tree assessment, tree canopy assessment. Wake County has about 54% in 2020 of canopy cover. They're able to differentiate between deciduous and coniferous. Coniferous also includes fleshy evergreens as well. I'm not a huge fan of this particular label because deciduous and evergreen makes more sense to me, but apparently it's not the industry standard to use that phrase. So it does include things like magnolias and hollies as well, just in case you were wondering. 3/4 or so of the entire county is deciduous, which I think most of us would probably have expected if we thought about it. In Apex, our canopy coverage is about 50.4%, and our deciduous is slightly higher, but still roughly 3/4, with about 27% coniferous. Most of that's longleaf pines and things like that. The overall canopy health in Apex is actually surprisingly very good. There, over 65% of our canopy is in the good or very good range. The just slightly over 10% is in the poor, dead, dying, or not classified category. I think that that's actually very, very good, especially considering all the challenges that we've had with our canopy over the last decade or two. This is just an example of one of the parks where they did a more in-depth and detailed analysis, and they just wanted to kind of show this is the community park, and it's got pretty much all good and very good canopy out there. There's a few places along the edge of the lake and along the edge of a couple of the parking lot islands and stuff that have trees that are struggling a little bit more. But Generally, the ones that you'll see that are doing the best are normally closer into the middle anyway, so that's actually fairly consistent with most places. This is just to give you an idea of the census block cover and what census blocks look like, or census block groups. They are generally designed to have about 4,000 people roughly per census block group in them. And so that explains why several of them are very small towards the center of Raleigh. And then as you get further out, they get much, much larger. It's because they're trying to give you something that you can compare across populations. It doesn't always work great when you're looking at land, but it does give you an idea of the impact. So these super dark corners and pieces are the highest canopy percent, over 60%. And then you can kind of look at this and tell where the town's cores are based on where the lighter pieces are. And again, Apex has the same thing because we have, so new block groups are only created just prior to a new census. So the smaller ones that you see here are the ones that were created for the 2020 census and don't reflect any additional in-migration since then. So there may be more people, say, in this one, for example, now than there were then, but it's still the same block group at the moment. The southern portion is generally got our highest canopy cover, and this is mostly the Viridia area. This is along 55 and in kind of that industrial core of town, downtown. This is more around where Pleasant Park is and kind of that portion of town. This is pretty much Salem Street. That's pretty much what that is right there. And then, of course, this imagery was from 2020, and we all know how much development has happened in the last 3 years. So there will be areas on this that you look at and you go, and that's totally understandable. But the reality is we had to set a date somewhere, and these sets are only flown every 10 years by the government or by the feds. So short of the town hiring somebody to fly these more regularly to give us more regular updates, we cannot do this analysis more frequently. And that's an option if town council decides to do that. It's not a requirement, however. So just to give you an idea, within our corporate limits, we're looking at about 44.6% canopy cover, and in our ETJ, we're looking at about 62%. If we were to look at the areas outside of our ETJ closer to Jordan Lake, it would be a much higher number as well, but technically that's not in our jurisdiction yet.
Is there like an annexation boundary, or Apex can just keep going as long as those people want to be included?
We don't have an annexation boundary on that side. We have one to the north with Cary, to the east with Cary, Morrisville, and Holly Springs, and to the south with Holly Springs. So and those are called municipal agreement lines. It's basically so that we're not snatching each other's property in bizarre and unusual ways, so that it's a little more orderly. But yes, you've definitely seen projects, and as a matter of fact, Horton Road is one of those, one we saw today, where somebody is outside of the ETJ, but they want to develop and they want to get access to town water and sewer. And so those can get added in at any point. It's a voluntary annexation process. We've also had several projects where somebody's well just runs completely dry, and the development up the road just ran a water line pretty close to them, and they're like, well, I'll pay taxes if it means I can have water for my house. Which
so
is
it might be
understandable.
reasonable to think that part on the west, like that's going to eventually become
Odds are good.
Apex. Okay.
With the exception of a few holdouts who just won't want nothing to do with it. But odds are good, yes.
Okay.
So this map gives us an idea of the historical canopy change. Green means that they've actually gained canopy. And as you go back up towards red, go through the transition there, it means that that block group has had more than 10% canopy loss. Apex has actually lost about, or Wake County rather, has lost about 2% total. The relative change and the absolute change are different numbers, but the absolute change is what I want you to focus on. And that is surprisingly good, honestly. Part of that is that there are municipalities like Cary and Raleigh in the area that really don't have a lot more space that they can develop. So they've kind of maxed themselves out to a large degree. Although you'll notice that that our boundary with Chatham County is actually a perfectly straight line, and this one has little nubbins. That's just because they wanted to include all the area in Cary, where they've already kind of grabbed some pieces, in order to make this really useful for them. And then this is the same map, but zoomed in for Apex. We have had a much higher absolute change and loss, and I think any one of us would have expected that to be the case just because of the sheer amount of development that we're seeing. Unfortunately, while staff has worked with developers to protect kind of our core main streams and those kinds of areas, there's a lot of it that we can't legally, by state law, require people to preserve. We're always open to new options and trying new things out, but we're still struggling on that front. Now, the next part is actually pretty cool, in my opinion. We had something similar from the Trees and Stormwater project that was done in 2017, where they gave us a planting area analysis. Now, this one took some additional stuff into consideration that one did not, and they did it for the entire county. Basically, their priority levels go from very low, is like a bluish turquoisey color, to a very high priority is bright red, which is a really nice, useful way to look at that. Some of the things that went into identifying these is we actually worked very closely with them to give them data sets where we have existing underground utilities that cannot be impacted by trees, so our water and sewer lines in particular. Trees love those nummy nutrients, but the utility department really doesn't like it when I put a tree on top of one of those. So those were taken out completely. Those were removed entirely from the analysis. The roads where there's impervious surface on them right now were taken out entirely as well. Not necessarily all of the right-of-way, but the actual impervious surface. And then we also had some areas like golf courses. We did take out all of the Duke electric lines because we know that Duke likes to come and mow their electric lines. We don't have very many golf courses. We just have the one off 1010. But, and then any visible cropland. So any place where somebody's actively farming right now, they took out because they just know that that's unlikely to actually get changed over. The vulnerability assessment, and part of what went into this and made this kind of more intense than what we did with trees and stormwater, is they looked at those urban heat islands, because we actually had a study done with NC State and Wake County about 3 years ago, I want to say, but I might be wrong on that timeline, that looked at an urban heat island analysis for the entire county. So it showed us where places were hotter than average. They also looked at social equity, so they pulled in the places where the average income, according to the census, and the average property values were much lower. And they looked at environmental impacts, so places that were closer to riparian buffers, major streams, major lakes, those kinds of areas. And I think topography was added in as well. And they used all of that to prioritize the planting areas. On this map, this shows every priority planting area. Every one of these little purple dots, and some of them are really, really small, is a place where that's been identified as needs to have trees planted. Now, the unfortunate reality is a lot of this is privately owned residential land. So one thing that the EAB might take away from this in working with TreeCap perhaps and the pollinator group is advocating for people to start planting more trees on their property. It won't necessarily provide us with a canopy immediately, but in 10 or 15 years, which feels like a long time to most people, but I've been here 10 years and I can't believe it's been that long. It'll have a significant impact. And honestly, most trees put on most of their growth within the first 5 years that they grow, and then they start slowing down. So with judicious identification of the right tree in the right place, that's something that I think could be helped quite a bit. This map shows us the urban heat island areas. Urban heat islands form where there's a lot of hardscape, so a lot of concrete, a lot of asphalt, and a lot of houses, honestly, or buildings that that absorb all of that heat during the day and then very slowly radiate it out. Like, I bet you if you walk outside at the end of this meeting from being in here and you go and stand on that concrete outside, that asphalt, and then you get home, you'll feel a 2 to 5 degree difference. I know from where I know that Apex downtown, where we are right now, is always 4 degrees hotter than my house in rural Durham is. And I've felt the same thing traveling out towards New Hill. So it's a big deal, mostly because when you don't have access, so it has a number of reasons why it's a big deal. One of them is health related. The poorest among us who don't have access to great air conditioning in the first place don't actually have a chance to cool down at night. And that's really important for the way that your body works. It's not actually as big of a deal how hot you get during the day, so much as whether or not you have a chance to cool down at night and come back to kind of homeostasis, come back to natural and normal. And that affects the least advantaged of us overall. It's also a big deal because it causes a lot more extreme weather. I mean, everybody has seen the Weather Channel times when they're looking at Atlanta, and Atlanta has this like weird little ring of storms right around it, and everything else is just vacant, and you're like, oh yeah, urban heat island effect. And it does the opposite too sometimes. Sometimes it means that you don't get any rain where everything else around you is getting rain. I've definitely watched that on the radar near my house.
Happens a lot in Apex.
It does. It just disappears.
Yeah.
It's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's gone.
Yeah.
So, and it's worse in larger cities, but as Apex gets more built up, it's going to be a bigger and bigger issue. And it's something that when we work on the hazard mitigation plan is actually a really big deal. Heat is the #1 killer of any weather-related phenomenon every year. We don't think about it very often because most of the time we're inside air conditioning, but it is consistently the #1 killer across the country. I might be a little passionate about that one. I apologize. So what they did was take all of that information. It was good stuff. Hey, you. And they put it all together in a weighted matrix, a program that they ran through GIS, and they came up with planting areas that had the greatest chance of mitigating the 3 problems we just talked about, and that had the highest priority. This is not the full resolution image, but it will give you an idea, and I'm sure you had already guessed where the priority basically was based on living here. Pretty much the newer developments inside the Peakway or within our commercial and industrial areas are a big deal. And a lot of this is the core of the original city or the original town, and and then spreading westward along our major roads as we had more development come in. The tree placement modeling, they did an example for us, and that's the athletic fields at the nature park. And this just gives you an idea of what they consider enough space for a tree and everything. So they actually identified planting site sizes based on small, medium, and large trees, which will have a mature crown that varies between 20 and 40 feet. What they consider mature, they can't always get bigger than that, of course. And they identified areas that didn't have other trees planted within a certain distance. In this situation, we came up with about a total of 338 possible trees that could be planted around the fields, not including the actual fields themselves or the parking, but just around the fields. One thing to keep in mind is this did not stack trees, and by stacking, I mean most forests come with canopy, subcanopy, yes, and then your shrub layer. So this is only accounting for one layer of tree. It is not accounting for the fact that you can have a willow oak next to a tulip tree. No. Tupelo, that's what I'm thinking. A Tupelo tree, which is also called a black gum around here. Yep. Next to a dogwood or a redbud, and they will all do perfectly well in their respective niches, and they do not have to be spaced 40 feet apart. So it's actually technically possible that we could get more trees than that in there, but since this is looking at canopy as one layer, they weren't able to include that in their analysis. So some of our benefits and next steps, there's a great couple sheets in this document that can be used to kind of help sell newbie people on the benefits of trees. Things like trees in Apex, the existing canopy stores enough carbon to be over $71,000 worth, I'm sorry, $71 million worth. The total annual benefits to the canopy for that we have are over $59 million to the town, and that's just the ones in the town. And then, trees have all of these benefits for you as well. Wake County's trees have collectively removed more than 10 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere, valued at over $1.7 billion. So when we start looking at it in that perspective, it's pretty impressive. Trees also improve your property values and things like that. So they are recommending what they call operationalizing data. This is just executive speak for taking this data and using it to make operational decisions inside of the town. So think like, where are you going to put your money? What are your reasons for putting your money in a certain place? Are you going to look at this consistently and refer back to it as time goes on? So of course, land use and management planning is a part of that. Development plan review, right there as well. Ordinance evaluation, tree planting initiatives are a big deal. Identifying funding opportunities, because there is actually a lot of funding out there to preserve or plant preserve existing canopy or plant new canopy areas. And then formulating your tree canopy preservation and planting goals. They listed just a few of the departments that actually have money available for some of these things. We also got a really cool software out of this that is for the county as a whole, but you can also drill down to just the Apex specific data. It's called Tree Keeper Canopy. It actually allows you to go in and do a whole bunch of different types of analysis with a wide variety of different inputs and outputs and all kinds of stuff. It's a lot of fun to play with. That will be on Wake County's website, and we'll be able to look at that. You're welcome to take a look and mess around with it. It was a little beyond today's scope to do so, because I can play with that thing for quite a while. This just gives you an example of one of the things that you can do. This is drilling down to where you can do priority planting areas. So it's identifying buildings and roads and things, and then the areas around them that could potentially have additional trees, and whether or not they're high, medium, or low based on our color scheme. Everybody loves data. Where's Mr. Gant? He loves data. And So this is going to help us make kind of more logical decisions moving forward, hopefully.
Is there an idea for the staff to try to do an overlay of these priority areas for?
We have not really started formulating suggestions and options yet. Part of that is because we want to wait until town council sees it, and we want to see what direction they want us to head in before we start heading in our own directions. I would not be surprised if that is on the list of options. That sounds like something that we would probably end up doing. I just haven't heard that particular one just yet. We're quite certain that we're going to be spending a lot more time using this data set in the immediate future, though. And I'm kind of looking forward to it. So the next steps is Wake County is going to work on presenting these reports to the stakeholders. We brought it to you guys first because you guys are interested in this stuff, and we wanted to see if you had any thoughts or suggestions for us. You can email them to me separately if you come up with ones later, or you're welcome to give them to me now. Then they actually on September 5th kind of kicked off their public engagement process, and they're going to be doing a bunch of public education in order to focus on the canopy benefits over the next several months. That's probably something that town council is going to ask us to do as well, and we would love your help with that. And then we're going to be continuing to work with other, not just Wake County, but also working with their other stakeholders like DOT and other groups as well. Wake County Public Schools might be an interesting one to work with. And then in about 5 or 10 years, we anticipate doing a follow-up study. In 5 years, we'll get here a lot faster than any of us expects.
Yeah, because in 5 years, the new NAEP imagery will be out, right?
Or we might be able to find alternative imagery that'll give us the same option. But yeah, 5 years is generally the increment that they recommend for these, because most places don't grow as fast as Wake County has been.
Yeah.
So
that's difficult, because I would imagine the imagery that's most useful to you is leaf off, but the NAEP imagery, it has to be leaf on to be able to do this.
Honestly, I can use both pretty equally, and the town does get far more frequently updated aerial imagery. We get every quarter, but that imagery is not something that we own the data set to. We have streaming rights to it, but we don't actually own it, so we couldn't give it to anybody to have them run the analysis on it, because we thought about that, and we actually tried adding that to our contract, and there was no.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Huh.
So, you're welcome.
You mentioned like an idea about in talking about public education, and that a lot of the areas of high priority are private. So I was thinking about like Apex's like Waste Wizard, where you can see when your schedule is. It'd be interesting to like put in my address and see, is my address a priority area, and then what are some like, and then like directing me to like native trees that might work for smaller lots or larger lots, because I live on a smaller lot where there's not a lot of space for for any of the trees that for Plant the Peak, but maybe there's some options. Or
well, I can show you right now a quick place that you can go to look for small trees. It's the town's design and development manual, and you can just type in design and development manual from the front cover. I don't think you were on the board when we updated this, Greg. So everybody else, just bear with me, you've already seen it. So we actually went through and we broke out our recommended planting list by different types of like large, medium, and small trees. I scrolled up too far by accident, but this is the medium trees. These are 30 to 50 foot tall trees. That's probably too big for your lot based on what you said. But we do have a variety, like 2 or 3 pages of small trees, and they only get to be, I mean, honestly, most of them are about 25 feet tall, but I have the occasional 30 foot tall tree on here. And then some of them are very small. So like technically a wax myrtle cousin called the Northern Bayberry only gets to be about 10 feet tall, but it's still technically considered a tree. Some of them are only 20 feet tall, and that's at maximum size. We have them in here from natives at the top in alphabetical order and then introduced adaptives at the bottom. Nothing on here is invasive, and everything in here grows really well in this zone. So you might have to check to see if it's, for example, requires wet soil versus dry soil or something. But NC State has a great tool where you can just type in the name of any tree species and it'll give you more data than you really wanted to know about any of it.
We had, John brought up a technical question.
Yes.
Since we no longer have a quorum, do we technically need to adjourn?
You do.
Okay.
Unfortunately. But since I don't actually need you to recommend approval of anything right now, that's a good thing.
Okay, so if anybody has any other comments or things, send them directly to you. Okay.
Everybody should have my email address from the last couple times I blitzed you with stuff. So feel free to just send me any suggestions. I'm happy to put them all together. I'm even happy to put them together as in a charter table to email back out to the group if that's what you guys want me to do. I'm perfectly happy with that. That's fine.
Okay, well, thank you, Shelley, for all of that information. That
You're
is
very welcome.
Greatly appreciated. And I guess we,
Motion to adjourn.
okay. Second? All right, all in favor? All right, thank you. Could you just email me an update or email everybody an update of?
I will email you if you want to email someone else.